Again, thank you, Fran, and thank you again to the entire Hudson Valley RAP Committee, who worked so hard and so successful to achieve this great event today. Thank you as well to our sponsors, advertisers, and exhibitors, and to each and every one of you here today, who by your presence at this event demonstrate your commitment to your own professional development, to your business, and to the future of our industry. So far, 2015 has been a very successful year for PIA and its members. There's a lot for us to celebrate, particularly on the legislative and regulatory fronts. At the beginning of the year, we were successful in having Governor Cuomo finally sign the PIA Certificate of Insurance Bill into law, a challenge that we have been fighting for several years. Another major, long-fought victory is the beginning of reform to the New York auto inspection requirements. As most of you are aware, PIA has worked hard to eliminate the state mandatory photo inspection rules for years and led the reform initiation. Working with vendors such as Cargo, legislators, and the Department of Financial Services, we were able to amend the regulatory and adopted reforms, including reducing the inspection from 5 to 14 days. Early in this process, we found friends who supported our effort, friends who were similarly concerned as we were for the New York insurance buying drivers and for businesses like our agencies. The leaders in the legislature on this process was your own Hudson Valley Assemblyman Kenneth Zebrowski of the 96th District. A native of New City and a practicing attorney, Assemblyman Zebrowski graduated from Clarkstown School before receiving his bachelor's degree from the State University of New York at Albany, and a Juris Doctorate degree from Seton Hall University School of Law. He was first elected to the State Assembly in 2007. He was re-elected 3 subsequent terms, and during his years of service in the State Assembly, he has sponsored laws that reduce unfunded mandates, cut government waste, foster businesses and job growth, and protect the consumers. He currently serves as the co-chairman of the Administrative Regulation Review Committee and sits on numerous committees such as Codes, Environmental Conservation, Judiciary, Law, Ethics and Guidance, Government Employees, and Library Committees. And as I started when I began the introduction, he has been a great sponsor of the PIA and our members of the New York State consumers he serves so well. Therefore, it is a great pleasure to introduce our distinguished speaker and to present him with the Presidential Citation on behalf of PIA.
Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon. It's a privilege to be here today to talk a little bit, I guess, about our efforts in Albany, about whatever is going on in Albany. I could take some questions. I appreciate the reading of my bio. I'm in my 5th term. I don't know where the time goes, but I was elected at 26 and was a new, young assemblyman at the time. I think I was the youngest at that time in the New York State Legislature. Now I'll be 35 next month, which I certainly still feel pretty young, but I'll tell you, in a legislature of 150 members, one of the best parts is that we're sort of a living, breathing, moving body, and I'm not even close to the youngest anymore. I think probably the youngest is James Scoofus, who represents Orange County. He comes down into Rockland a little bit. He's 27 years old now. I think he was elected at 25, and we have a long history in the New York State Assembly of people getting elected from all different professions, all different ages, all different walks of life. I think Chuck Schumer was an assembly member at the age of 21. I think Dick Godfrey, who's still there, was elected at about 20. I'm not even sure, but he's been there for as long as anyone can remember. I think he's the longest, not only sitting assembly member, but the longest probably employee in the state right there right now. But it's really a pleasure to be here and to talk a little bit. I've enjoyed my relationship with the professional insurance agents. And really, the thing that I enjoy the most, you read my bio that I have a JD from Seton Hall Law School. I'm a practicing attorney. A little bit of practice. It's not all that much at this point, but I do enjoy practicing law. And I enjoy getting into in-depth on issues and talking to professional agencies and talking to people, whether it's constituents that walk into my office or lobbyists that come from agencies like yours or members that are in your field. Because that's what interests me. Laws, regulations, those type of things interest me. And they're mundane and they're boring too, but that's what really affects people's lives. And I think the frustration with government also oftentimes comes from the fact that people are just dealing in sound bites and dealing in press releases and dealing with whatever issue that they can get into a glossy mailer in November, whereas agencies like yours and professions like yours feel like nobody's really listening to you. Nobody's listening to what's going on in the ground, and nobody's really trying to do anything. So we have laws that are on the books, like the photo inspection law, for 30 plus years because nobody's really paying attention. And as things get outdated and they become costly not only for you but for consumers, nobody really looks. So I chair a commission called the Administrative Regulation Review Commission, and it's a big mouthful. And when you're talking to your constituents and you're trying to sound important and you say, well, I chair the Administrative Regulation Review Commission, you know, their eyes glaze over and say, well, why don't you chair labor or something like that? But I enjoy the commission because it looks at all the state agency regulations. We get everything that when a state agency issues a regulation, myself, Chris, I have Kim here, and we have counsel in Albany. We look at every single one of those things, and we issue comment on it. So we really can be a resource to your organization, to organizations and professionals across the state of New York, because that's really where the things happen. Certainly laws and statutes affect you, but that's just the start. The amount of power that we give to the state agencies to regulate are really where things get done. So certainly in the future, you know, use me as a resource, use me as someone in an office that I hope will listen to you. I meet with agents that come up from across the state and from my district on a regular basis. We usually meet in my district office, we meet up in Albany, and it's the time for us to really discuss those things. So just a few of the things that we've been able to work on in the past few years, certainly the photo inspection law, and it's a good example of how things, I think, get done in Albany. And as you probably know, it doesn't just, with the snap of a finger, things just don't get changed. It really takes collaboration between legislators, collaboration with people in the field, with your lobbyists. You have certainly lobbyists up in Albany. I think the lobbyists think of, when the public thinks of lobbyists, oftentimes they think of people that are up there probably making campaign donations and stuff like that. But what really I think of lobbyists is they are, they're like lawyers in a lot of ways. They are people that are skilled in presenting the case from organizations and from people to legislators. And just like a lawyer can go into a courtroom and succinctly make an argument, that's what lobbyists do, is they succinctly make argument. And what is helpful is when it's backed up by people who are in the field. And that's really what your organization has done a great job in having people from the field make the case. So when we first started dealing with the photo inspection law, and we went through it and really felt like it was an outdated piece of technology that was costing consumers, and really it was a headache for insurance agents, because if people didn't get it, their insurance would lapse. Nobody really understood why it was there, what was going on. So we drafted Assembly Bill 1305, which made it optional. It didn't even mandatorily repeal it, but it made it optional. And for you know, why don't we let the marketplace dictate whether or not this is necessary? Why don't we let the carriers dictate whether or not this is necessary? We just made it optional. But it started the process. So the first year, the major company, Carco, came in And they're an intimidating bunch. I don't know if anybody's ever met with them before, but they come in, they have form of police officers. Big guys that come in and they sit down and they show you all the technology, and they have newspaper articles that were clipped out from the 70s and 80s, and they tell you how bad it was and how everybody's car was getting stolen back then. And if it weren't for this photo law, you know, we would go right back to the 70s or 80s. And they would go around to all the different legislators. So that first year it was a no way, you know, this is what's working. And we started to make the case that since that point, with the advent of the internet, Carfax, the federal government's and the VIN program and all those things, all these steps have taken place since that time. And we weren't just going to roll back and go back to the days where you park your car in New York City, you come out of a show, and it's not there anymore, and these fear tactics. So that was the first year. The second year, the Carco came in, and you know, they started to soften. Well, maybe we could soften these things a little bit, but we need this program, blah, blah, blah. By the third year, we started to push the bill. They started to be ready to come to the table. And we started to make, at the time, I became the chair of the commission that oversees the state agencies and was able to talk to the state agencies, and we really started to get some momentum and started to really educate people. The chairs of the insurance committee was interested in the law. And then by the fourth year, and the time we finally got the regulation changed, I thought you saw a whole new aspect being put forth by the insurance committee. You saw members that were educated, and that's really what it takes in Albany a lot of times, is a constant education, not just from the person that's sponsoring the bill, someone that's interested to get into depth, in the weeds on some of these things. And then you also did a very good job in terms of mobilizing people across the state to inform and educate their legislators. And of course, we didn't at the end of the day get a statute enacted. We got the state agency to issue regulations that eased off those burdens, and that's sometimes how you have to do it. You know, I've worked on a host of things that start with a statute and end up with something that's either implemented in the budget or it's implemented by a state agency. I mean, we're working on a thing right now for full-day kindergarten. I drafted a law. I don't know whether the law is going to get passed, but it starts the conversation. When we talked about reducing unfunded mandates with the county, when we had the tax cap implemented, and I started to talk about the need to cap what our counties were paying in Medicaid costs and have the state take them over, I started with a statute, and it ended up getting implemented as part of the budget. So that's sort of the way I think you can get things done in Albany. And I guess my one advice is to keep your eye on the ball, is to get a legislator that's willing to listen to the people in the field, start with a statute, galvanize support, talk to the committee chairs, and really start to talk in depth to the state agencies. When you have that, and you have the grassroots support and people educating their legislators across the state, you can really get things done. Something that we've started since that point, we really started to work on the state insurance fund and some of the inequities that are installed between the state insurance fund and private insurers, and the amount of time that you have to give notice if you're going to cancel your policy. And it's, I think, a perfect example of how not only does it affect the industry, but it affects consumers, because now consumers don't necessarily understand. You know how people's lives work. They don't necessarily able to put forth something or give notice within 10 days or something like that. And to have this sort of disparity, it hurts the consumer. It doesn't just hurt the industry. So we started that process last year, and I think the same type of thing started to happen. At first we got meetings from people within the state insurance fund that were no way, no how, we're the insurer of last resort, and you know, we need these protections. And you start to, you know, present the facts and present where we're at, where we were, and deal with the state agencies. You really, you start to move the ball. And we started that last year, and hopefully we'll have some successes as we move into next year. So, you know, I would just like to say from an overall perspective, from Albany, we need to recognize that as we talk about economic development and we talk about the need to move New York State forward, and we've done some positive things in the past. The thing that frustrates me, and the thing I think that frustrates business owners around the state, is that we're always looking for the next new bright thing. And whether it's talking about nanotech or talking about manufacturing or the things we can do around the state, what we forget is that we have a business community and a business climate and businesses around the state of New York that are just drowning under our regulations, drowning under inequitable laws like the State Insurance Fund, drowning in unfair regulations that have not been on the books for a number of years, like the photo inspection law. And part of the photo inspection law was because, are we gonna lose jobs? Well, I don't want to lose any jobs, but that doesn't mean that you hold up an entire industry because you have one company in Long Island that does this. So when we talk about economic development, the state really needs to take a step back and look at those type of things that are hindering economic development, hindering our small business owners from moving forward and in some cases making things close. And I think that's the type of thing that I hope to bring to the Administrative Regulation Review Commission, is finally an open and honest dialogue and policy with the various organizations and the various associations about those type of regulations, because we're not afraid to get into the weeds on some of these things and talk about it. And it may not make great headlines, it may not great talking points for an election, but it's those type of things that I think that really move the state in a different direction. I've talked to the governor's office about some of these things. They seem to be on board. I have my staff, like I said, I have Kim Giordano and Chris President here. Chris has been my chief of staff for over 8 years. And Chris really, for those people, some of the people in the room that dealt with my office know that he's a great resource, because he's willing to go that extra mile to do the research that's necessary to change some of these things. And I have a counsel. I have Rich Murphy up in the New York State Assembly, who is really a guy that you would think would be the counsel for the Administrative Regulation Review Commission. All this guy does is sit in a room reading these big books of regulations all day, every day. And I love Rich. He comes in, he's got a big beard, he's got kind of long hair. He just looks like someone that's been in the State Assembly reading regulations for 20 years. But I see a camera here. I hope I don't put that on. Rich sees that. But he's really a tremendous resource because he understands where we've gone and where we're going. And he honestly loves to take on work. So when I call him up with something from, that you guys bring to me as an outdated regulation, he loves to get to work, because, in July and August and September, when we're not necessarily in session, he's looking for projects and things to do. And this is the time of year where we can do that background work and really get some things done. So it interests me. I hope it interests you. This isn't, I don't think this is the most exciting speech I've ever given, but I hope you just consider me a resource as we move forward, because I consider that type of stuff, the black letter law that's passed in statute and passed in regulations, as the important type of stuff that trickles down and affects your lives and then affects consumers. All the crazy things we talk about as in terms of with insurance, streamlining flood insurance and hurricane insurance, and recognizing that consumers aren't reading the small print and knowing that a hurricane has to be 20 knots or whatever it is, and then they have an insurance policy with 18 knots and not 20 knots. It's that type of stuff that really affects people's lives, and until the state recognizes that, we're going to continue to be always trying to play catch-up on some of those things. So I really appreciate this honor. I can take any questions. I don't know if you have time for that in the program or not, but I look forward to another hopefully successful year and successful session. And I look forward to the people in the room that are up in my office when we can say hello and chat again in New City and Albany again. So thanks very much for this honor. I don't know who's running the program. If you want to take questions, I certainly can about this or anything in Albany. We're good? Yeah. Yeah, I think there's been discussions. Our majority leader in the Assembly has been someone that has put forth legislation in the past, so I've spoken to him about it, and I do think there's some discussions, especially with some of the, even labor, recognizing that perhaps some of these regulations hinder, growth to the extent that it then trickles down, affecting jobs and infrastructure and funding and stuff like that. So I do think there's conversations happening more so than there were in the past, maybe 4 or 5, 10 or more years. I mean, I can't read you statutory language here, but yeah, I can just tell you that I think those conversations have been happening. Any other questions? Nothing? Nothing in Albany? Come on, it's an interesting place. I could ask.
Is there anything afoot in New York legislature about keeping the definition of a small group to 100 employees instead of dropping down to 50, because that's going to wreak havoc on a lot of the employers who have it?
Yeah, well, I can tell you if it's not being discussed, it will be discussed from me, because I've heard from numerous small employers in my county, 80 employees, 90 employees, who have brought this directly to me. Specifically, a company was in my office the other day. So it's something that now that we have the leeway from the federal government to change those regulations, it's something that I'll be pushing. And it's something, honestly, it's a good example of how we have to educate Assembly members from across the state to recognize how this is affecting businesses' bottom lines. And we have to sort of, so I don't know that it's something that your organization can spearhead, maybe through some of the other business organizations, and have those people call their legislators. But I hope to spearhead that in the next year, because I've sat down with some of my businesses, they've showed me and explained to me their books and how it's going to cost them a couple $100,000 in some areas. Anybody else? All right, well, thank you very much. It's certainly, as we move into January, we have, as the person asking the question before said, we have 2 new leaders in the state legislature. I had the new speaker down in Rockland County for a 5-hour period, and I ran him around Rockland County meeting with schools, towns, the county, business leaders, and I think he saw a lot of the challenges that we see in my suburban county just last week, so hopefully we're able to push some new things, some new exciting ideas. Our majority leader, Joe Morelli, I think has been someone that a lot of people in this room have found to be a resource, and someone that's open-minded and willing to listen and try to seek compromise amongst the varying competing forces in the state. So hopefully, I'm hopeful about what we can do in the next few years with the New York State Assembly. So I'll be here for a little bit. Anybody else has any questions or comments, I'll be right at this table. And thank you very much for this honor. It's really fun.